I welcome you on behalf of the Europe Direct Core platform. For those of you who are not aware of what we do, our work is to disseminate information and awareness about initiatives being held at EU level. But initiatives, obviously these initiatives, although held at EU level, have an impact as well on our lives and how we will work together, both as a local community and as well as an EU community. Today we'll be discussing artificial intelligence with a European approach. I welcome our guests today. Dr. Elena Grek, which is the head of the European Commission representatives here in Malta. Also Ms. Irina Olsic, who is the representative of the European Commission. And Professor Alexei Dingley, lecturer and researcher, and Mr. Marcel Coutaillard, which is a business owner. So I will leave the floor to Dr. Elena Grek for the introduction, please.
So thank you, Marika, and thank you to the other participants for joining us in this very timely seminar, which the European Commission representation in Malta is organizing together with the core platform Europe Direct Center. Welcome to our audience as well. Artificial intelligence sounds very much like a big word. And when you think about it, you probably ask yourself, what is it really about? It sounds like something coming from science fiction, at least, I guess, for people of a certain age, it is like that. But when you stop to think about it, if you're using a computer, you're already using artificial intelligence in a way. So the concept is not so alien. Maybe we just don't grasp how very much at our fingertips it has become and how dependent we have become on it. Obviously, this is a field which has been under research and under development since the 1970s. And the ambition of society, the ambition of researchers and industry has always been to develop it to the level where a computer, a robot, an artificial body, if you like, can think autonomously. We are not there yet, obviously. For a computer to give you results, you have to input data, and the computer gives you results only because it's programmed to follow the data that you input to it, and then it gives you the result according to the knowledge that it has, to the intelligence that you have programmed it with. Now, however, the ambition is to get machines to think for themselves, which obviously has pros and cons. And the European Commission is one of the leaders as an international organization bringing together 27 member states, has the ambition of regulating how far AI can go in terms of what we need it to do in order to protect human beings, because it's the stuff made of science fiction stuff. When you think, for example, and we've seen movies in the sense of robots taking over humanity and starting to kill off human beings just because something goes wrong with their programming. Something very common and widely known nowadays, driverless cars. How can you program a car to drive through a city when all of a sudden, for example, case in point in Malta, excuse me, you come across roadworks and all of a sudden the car, which has been programmed to do a certain distance at a certain speed or a certain route, is not aware of the roadworks going on and has to think for itself how it's going to find an alternative route. Can the car do it? How do you program a car to decide whether it drives into a wall or it hits to avoid hitting somebody who crosses the street spontaneously or without it being able to see it? These are all issues, ethical issues, which are the other side of the coin. of artificial intelligence. And earlier this year, the European Commission published a proposal, Europe Fit for the Digital Age, in which it tries to regulate, or it attempts to regulate, how artificial intelligence can be developed whilst at the same time remaining at the service of humanity, not overtaking humanity. This is something that we will have to start living with more and more in our lives as in the years to come, especially also in view of climate change and the changes we have to bring into our day-to-day lifestyle in order to reduce our impact on the world we live in. So we'll have to rely much more on artificial intelligence. How do we do that in an ethical way, in a way that does not threaten our well-being and the lives of of humanity? I'm no expert in that at all, so I will leave it to the other panelists to explain how things are going in this regard. Thank you for organizing this seminar, and I look forward to the interventions.
Okay, thank you for your intervention, Dr. Elena. Now we can listen to Ms. Irina Osic, please.
Good morning, and thank you very much for this invitation. I will share my screen and tell you quickly what this is about. So I think you should see my screen now.
Yes.
And now possibly also without a black box. Yes, so Elena Gregg already said it. In this April, we were adopting a package on AI. And this package is based on a couple of years of work we did before. And we always said that we want to foster artificial intelligence because we believe it is very important for the competitiveness, for the capacity to innovate, for the business in Europe. It can bring a lot of benefits to society, for example, when it comes to health and recognizing diseases, or also to fight climate change. But indeed, there are also some risks, and perhaps it's not that the risks we know from the science fiction movies Elena Gregg was talking about are very imminent and will be there like today or tomorrow, but still there are a couple of risks. There are risks to the safety of citizens, as we just heard the example about the self-driving car, and there are risks to fundamental rights. And it is in that spirit that we have adopted the AI package. So with a coordinated plan to push measures and with a proposal for an Artificial Intelligence Act to minimize the risks. So let me, voila. So I start with giving you a bit of the foundations of what is in the legal act. So first of all, we follow harmonization legislation, which is the product safety approach. This means that the act applies to AI being put on the European market. So it is before putting it on the market that certain AI systems, I will talk about that later, will have to fulfill certain requirements. These requirements are planned to be standardized, and this will be checked in a conformity assessment. So it's not for every user, but it is for the one who is developing, who is marketing, who is providing the AI to fulfill that requirement. That requirement, as I said before, those requirements to protect safety and fundamental rights. And here it's a bit the novelty to protect fundamental rights with a product safety approach. It is a risk-based approach, and for that I quickly go to the next slide. So the whole act, you have to imagine yourself as a pyramid. We don't want to regulate the entire technology. We do want to regulate those measures which have a certain risks, the risks for fundamental rights, for safety. So if you look at the pyramid on the bottom, you have all the systems where we find that there is minimal or no risk. We allow them without any restrictions, but we encourage indeed people to play by voluntary codes of conduct or certification systems, like for example, Malta has one, but there is no compulsory regulation on our side. Then on the second layer of the pyramid, you have what is in yellow, the transparency risk, we call it. So that means that, for example, if you are exposed to a chatbot or to an emotional recognition system or something, you should be informed about it. So you should be knowing that this is now an AI, which is your counterpart. Then the third layer are the high risk applications. That is what is really important. That is the core of the legislation. So here we have a number of sectors, and within those sectors, individual use cases. And these use cases need to comply with a number of requirements, for example, with regard to the quality of the data, with regard to documentation, robustness, accuracy, cybersecurity, indeed, information to be provided like for medical products. So all these requirements need to be fulfilled. Many of those will be, as I said before, standardized. So it will be relatively easy to fulfill them. There will be a conformity assessment on these. Indeed, all this is our proposal. So I don't know what at the end is going to be decided. I just tell you what we proposed. So this is high risk, core of it. And then we have on the top of the pyramid, we have very few applications which we consider to be of an unacceptable risks. So there we would prohibit them. Here we have social scoring, we have certain manipulative practices, and we have certain biometric systems for the purpose of law enforcement in the publicly accessible space. So this is the pyramid, this is how it looks. Just to tell you that we believe that about 85% of all systems will be in the green, respectively perhaps yellow category. So it's only 10 to 15% of all AI which we are going to regulate, or which we are planning to regulate. Now back to the other slide. So I said it's a risk-based approach. And indeed, it's a global playing field. That means that all AI coming to the European market, independent from whether it comes from Europe or from somewhere else, needs to play by the same criteria. It's a horizontal act, so we don't have any sectorial exceptions. It applies to all sectors, though indeed the standards might be then different depending on the sector, but it applies to all AI. It is coherent and complementary with existing legislation. So, for example, if we look at the data protection rules, the consumer protection rules, the anti-discrimination rules, safety legislation, we don't want to duplicate the rules. We really want to be part of a puzzle, if you want to see it like that, where all the different rules go hand in hand. And we don't want to prohibit something which is already regulated in other acts, or we don't want to regulate stuff where there is already something. And then the last point is the AI Act is innovation friendly, very important. So in the Act, we have provisions on regulatory sandboxes to enable companies, and in particular SMEs, to test out together with the regulator how they can develop an AI, how this is in compliance with the rules. We also have a couple of more measures, for example, on the conformity assessment fees for SMEs, where we believe it might be too expensive, so to see whether help is possible. But on the innovation side in particular, we have the coordinated plan I told you, adopted the same day. And for us, excellence and trust always go hand in hand. So it's very important to have this also thought together with the AI Act. Just to guide you very quickly through it, we have 4 key policy objectives. So first of all, we want to set the enabling conditions. This concerns indeed national strategies, like Malta has one, to see that all EU member states have strategies to develop synergies, to have complementarity. Then very important to tap into the potential of data. So you know that we already have the Data Governance Act, and then the Data Act is on its way, because if you want to develop good AI, you need good data. So this is what is done in parallel. And then another very important ingredient for successful AI is indeed the computing capacity. We have on the second axe, we have the excellence from lab to the market. So we have different collaborations between stakeholders. We have research projects. We have testing and experimentation facilities and digital innovation hubs to really enable companies to test AI, to have tailor-made solutions for them. And then we have the funding environment, the ecosystem of finance, where we want also enable companies to work with AI. And we know that in particular, startups and scale-ups, this is not always easy in Europe. And I think on that one, the Maltese strategy is really a very good example of what can be done. We then have the technologies for people here, very important talent and skills. We all know that we don't have sufficient people in Europe to work on everything regarding AI, so to foster talent and skills. Here we also have international cooperation. And then last thing, and this is new in the coordinated plan, is to have also a sectorial approach. So climate, environment, health, a strategy for robotics, the public sector, law enforcement, immigration and asylum. And a last one, I think you have now, you see mobility and agriculture. And with that, my time is over. I thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to any question.
And now the intervention to Professor Alexei Dingley, please.
So thank you very much for this invite. Today I'll talk about how AI will transform our business and our lives. First of all, let's start from a very simple summary of what is AI. So AI is, a technology, a computer technology, which tries to make computers smart or intelligent. We use it because it's extremely fast, much more faster than humans. It can handle huge amounts of data, which of course would be impossible for a human to do so. It's much more accurate. It's ideal for repetitive tasks, never get bored or take leave or sick leave. And of course, it reduces human errors to a maximum. On the other hand, AI technologies required capital investment, and maybe that's why some organizations shy away from these technologies. It might display jobs, and as we'll see, it's a real threat as well. AI expertise, on the other hand, is very rare, so we are not producing enough AI expert to deal with the upcoming revolution, and some applications are still better done by humans. From a practical perspective, a lot of people use AI on a daily basis. However, they do not realize that they're doing that. One of the problems is that, of course, AI doesn't come with a label, doesn't say that, this has an AI inside. But if we have a look at a few of the applications which we encounter on a day-to-day basis, we'll see that they're all infused with AI. So spam filters, mobile phone assistants like Siri, Cortana, Google Home, map navigation, Google Maps, document correction, grammar correction, automation with robotics, even these simple vacuum cleaners in the house, fraud prevention every time we buy something online, even when we search online through Amazon or similar online shops. Internet searches, they're all fueled by an AI, and of course social networking, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, decides what is inserted in our personalized feed. So as you can see, each and every one of us every day touches with some form of AI. And we are heavily dependent on this AI, even though, we are not aware that this is going to happen. Now, on the other hand, when you try to figure out what's the real situation, sometimes you think that, doomsday is coming, it's the end of the world. Why? Because you can see that, 47% of jobs will vanish in the next 25 years. 10 million British jobs could be gone in 15 years. robot automation will take 800 million jobs by 2030. 40% of jobs will be replaced in 15 years. So, you know, it's quite scary actually. But of course, you know, as I always say, the reality is always somewhere in the middle. And you can also look at the other side of the coin, whereby we all know that AI and related technologies will create millions of new jobs, which probably, you know, we're not even thinking about them today. On the other hand, AI and robots will create 60 million more jobs. So as you can see, you know, there are two sides of the coins. Now, of course, I understand that people will be confused about this, sort of, especially with regards to the question which many ask: will my job will be affected by AI? And the simple answer to this is probably yes. But of course, there are different degrees in which jobs will be affected, and I'll go into that a little bit later. In view of this, even last year during her State of the Union, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, said that we must make this Europe's digital decade. So, you know, there's this very important push, even how we heard before, towards AI in the coming years. I'd like to point out as well that, you know, AI is not just the fab of the moment. It's not a passing technology. It's here to stay, and as time passes, our life will keep on depending on AI. She also mentioned three important priorities, which were also mentioned in previous slides as well. So, you know, first is the data, because we are practically sleeping on payloads of data, which is extremely precious, and it is practically the fuel which can bring AI forward. Second is emerging technologies, in particular AI, and third is, of course, the infrastructure to move this data all along. Having said that, I believe that we as a European continent need to do more with regards to AI, because if we look at our counterparts in other continents, we look at the US, they have the National AI Initiative Office. If you look at China, they're investing hundreds of billions in artificial intelligence. And practically the major players, the major countries in the world are pushing forward towards AI. So I think we need to step up a little bit more. Also, when you look at consultants like Gartner, they predict that, you know, according to their hype cycle, most of the technologies which will become important in the coming years are all infused with some sort of AI. So, you know, it's a technology which we need to give it the importance it deserves. Of course, what's the impact on jobs? If we look at the report by the World Economic Forum, they are stating that, you know, AI will displace around 85 million jobs. But on the other hand, it will create 97 million jobs. So, you know, what this means is that in the coming years, we'll have a lot of disruption coming up. So it is high time that we start massive programs on upskilling and reskilling of our labor force, so that one, we avoid huge redundancies from those jobs that will be displaced, but also we ensure as well that, you know, the citizens of the European Union will get better jobs in this new AI economy. Another interesting fact is the thing that, you know, automation will take over by 2025. Now, automation, most of it is, of course, in the manufacturing industries, so in factories, etc. And if we have a look at what's happening as well in the East, countries like China, they're already experimenting with what is known as lights out manufacturing, whereby you have factories, entire factories, where practically don't need any lights, because, you know, there are no humans inside those factories, but it's just machines working 24/7. So this trend will keep on increasing in the coming years, and by 2025, for the first time ever on a global level, 52% of the work inside factories will be machines. But of course, as I'd like to say, automation doesn't come without its problems, and automation needs to be monitored. And this is actually a real example which I found out a few years back. So as you can see, there's a speed camera over there, and there's a tree next to the speed camera. Of course, you know, the speed camera works fine. It just takes pictures and it keeps on working forever. But in 2020, the tree grew up massively and got covered by that speed camera, and, you know, no one really realized about it until I alerted, of course, and they moved the tree. But the thing is that, you know, automation has this problem that it works fine until it stops working. So the human intervention is still very much important in the loop. So we have to find ways of, yes, automating our processes, but of course adding the checks and balance which only humans can provide in these cases. So, of course, the big question is, what are the implications on the workforce? Now, here I'd like to make a clarification. Sometimes we say, listen, AI will take over jobs. Now, to be precise, AI will take over tasks rather than jobs. You know, a job is made up of a number of tasks. So the automation part will be over those tasks. Now, of course, you know, there are cases where the AI will take over so many tasks that even that job will finish, but the largest majority will be with related to tasks. Will happen in the coming years. So the first scenario is that, you know, some jobs will not be affected really. They are the caring jobs where the person-to-person interaction is still very much important. So if I'm in hospital, you know, I prefer to have a human nurse rather than a robotic nurse. I think it's obvious for everyone. The second scenario is that, you know, some jobs will actually disappear. And here we're talking about, for example, drivers, where self-driving cars will take over, but also other jobs which so far are rather secure, like, for example, accountants. Why? Because it's a mathematical job, and you know, AI is very good at taking over mathematical tasks. So yes, we're seeing a decline also in those kind of jobs. The third scenario is that new jobs will be created, and over here we can see what I call an organ creator. So imagine, so far, if I have a problem with my lungs, with my heart, I go to hospital, I have to wait for a donor, and eventually if I get a donor, I get the transplant. But in the near future, what will happen is that we'll have 3D printing machines, which rather than printing plastic, they'll print organic materials. So if I need a new organ, I simply order that organ via the 3D printer. They will create a custom organ specifically for my body, and that will be replaced. So these are the kind of jobs which you know, we're not even dreaming of, but they will become a reality thanks to AI and other, of course, emerging technologies. However, the majority of jobs are those that will be augmented with AI. So what will happen is that specific tasks of those jobs will be taken over by the AI. Doesn't mean that the AI will replace the entire job, but it will make it much easier and much more efficient. And here I'd like to make a proviso that, you know, it's not just the low-paid jobs, the factory jobs that will be affected by this, but also the high-end jobs. I mean, we're already accustomed to things such as spell checker or grammar checker now when we're writing a document. But this will go even further, and I'll relate a small case study. So in the US a few years back, they did this test with an AI lawyer called LawGeeks. So they got 20 top US corporate lawyers. They gave them a number of NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, and they asked them to review them. Now the lawyers managed to review them in 92 minutes on average, and they had an average accuracy of 85%. The LawGeeks AI managed to do the same task in 26 seconds and got an accuracy of 94%. So as you can see here, there are specific tasks which AI can do very quickly, very easily, and much more efficient than a human. Of course, this doesn't mean that, you know, we'll have AI lawyers anytime soon in court, but we'll see AI systems assisting the lawyers during their representations in court. If we once again have a look at the report of the World Economic Forum, so we'll see that, you know, the top 20 jobs in demand are practically those which are the usual suspect, let's say the AI kind of jobs, so data analysts and machine learning specialists, etc., etc. Nothing surprising over there. But what's surprising is the 20 jobs which are declining. Because of course, at the top we find accountants, bookkeeping, financial analysts, managers, so on and so forth. So you know, our world is changing, and it's changing very rapidly, and we need to take stock of all of these changes. Also, there's a very big shift in skills, which unfortunately our schools are not preparing our children for. So, you know, our schools are still very much targeted at the content kind of schools, whereby the skills which are in need are the ones which are more sort of the people kind of skills, the analytical skills, the communication skills, the leadership skills, the use of technology, of course. So even down there, we need a big shift if we want to prepare our children to become the workforce of the future. As we all know, the pandemic made already huge changes to a certain extent. And this was the silver lining of the pandemic, because people are doing things much more online, something which we've been advocating for decades at least. But there was this resistance to change. But with the pandemic, we had to go for this change. And of course, in the future, we'll see many more of these changes. And in particular, there's the rising of the gig economy, whereby people are not employed with a particular employer, but they do specific gigs with that employer. So they do particular projects, and then they move on maybe to other projects. The nice thing about it is that, of course, you can get employers from all over the world. And mind you, this does not apply only for the techies, no, the data workers, because as you can see, this was a project which is currently in use in England and the UK, whereby you have truck drivers moving stuff in a warehouse remotely. Okay, so the forklift lifter is located somewhere else, somewhere far away, and you get people, real people, move and using it to transport stuff and within a warehouse remotely. So we're seeing these new innovative ways of using technology as a mediator in order to affect all sorts of work. Of course, this leads us then to the platform economy, where practically there's a platform and people can bid for work, and it's the sort of the democratization of work now, no? Because I am not only restricted to work which is available in my country, but I can bid for work anywhere in the world, any day of the week. It's up to me, really. And of course, this brings new freedom. So the digital nomads, that I can do my work from anywhere around the world. So my point is that, things are changing very rapidly, and we need to also change rapidly with this changing world, because otherwise we'll start falling backwards. Other countries are already doing that, and we need to be at the forefront if we want to get the benefits of this new AI revolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. So maybe we can start discussing something which Professor Dingley mentioned and caught me a bit by surprise, was the accountancy profession, because it's something close to my heart, being I work in the accountancy sphere as well. So, and there's something very interesting. Obviously, on paper, it may make sense that the artificial intelligence can take over, because if it's something like standard data, it can be computer, like I believe it can be done. But from my experience in the field, the complexities are not something that can be just dealt with by robotic intervention. So as you mentioned yourself, there are two sides to everything. So in a way, some tasks, I believe, can be actually taken over quite easily by artificial intelligence, but then the complexity and the thought behind the actual specifics of like client by client. Obviously, there is a unique experience for every like client has its own business, like as Mr. Marcel Coutard can say, I think from his business cannot be compared with another business. So every business had its unique. What do you think? Would you think that?
Marika, I think you better start looking for a new job.
I'm very, very worried to tell you the truth. So
no, but
not, because
back to your concern. I did have a few words with the Big Four as well in Malta, and they confirmed that they are actually implementing already automations in their process. So it's only.
But it's the clerical.
Marika, if I may, on this point, first of all, the beauty of AI is that it optimizes the human. Okay, so as has been pointed out by a number of speakers, AI is not going to replace the individual. It is going to have that individual to do his job better, having an AI to assist him.
It will boost it up, actually. So
exactly. So it is very common nowadays to use what we call RPA, okay, robotic process automation. So talking about accounts, it's only too common that there is a lot of mundane work to be done,
Yes,
whether it's sending
true.
statements at the end of the month, whether it's issuing invoices for retainers on a regular quarterly basis, or debt chasing. Why should I have to sit at my desk, see who has not paid, has to pay, and send out a statement or a warning letter or a legal letter? It is a structured process. So that lends itself beautifully into the automation.
Yes.
Okay, but AI per se, whilst we have to be careful, and I believe the Commission is looking at the ethics of how AI can be implemented, whether in business or in everyday life. The advantages of using it and implementing it now, obviously from a business side, is phenomenal, but not only. So it was mentioned climate change, it was mentioned smart cities. There are the advantages are phenomenal, okay? So when we think of AI, as was pointed out, it's all over. So you might have Alexa, you might have Google Home, you know, that's already, yeah? So if our banks have AI implemented, where would they have it implemented? An ideal scenario would be when they're giving out loans, okay? You're obviously looking at the individual you're going to give the loan, and not only are you going to go to the certain parameters, does he have the right permit, does he have the right finance or whatever, but you're looking at the bigger picture. Well, what type of job does he have? In the future, what are the trends for that job? With, for example, COVID, it blew away a lot of perception that my job is there no matter what. And therefore, the banks have to take that into risk. And basing on information, on data, these leads will allow those decisions to be taken in a better light. It will always and then come back to the manager who says, okay, I have all this information, thank you very much. I would like to still give the loan or not, depending on what decisions are being told. But it's done in a much faster way, as was pointed out by Professor Alex Dingley in relation to the lawyers. So many hours, so many seconds, and the results will be there. So whether it's lawyers, accounts, but it's not something of concern. It's something which is, let's take advantage of it, okay? And what's important is that there's the data. Now, the data in the government, in the public environment, it's important that the EU regulates and that that data is shared. Because if it's shared, it can be taken advantage of by businesses and by the governments themselves to ensure that things are done much faster. What we find in business is that there are a lot of silos of information, not necessarily structured in a way that can be made use straight off. And what would be beautiful is that if the Commission takes this to task, because if we are to lead as a European Union versus China versus America and whatever, we have to give the businesses the opportunity to flourish. Regulation is always important. And the point made that there are the relevant agencies which are offering sandboxes, okay, and allowing us to move on in that direction will assist. But private enterprises is actually implementing AI no matter what, okay? And whether it's AI in banking or AI in anti-money laundering, okay? So there are solutions out there which are looking at transactions, identifying where things are becoming trends. Because the information is structured, it's able to point out where there might be a suspicion, even in health claims, okay? So I'm talking insurance now. I don't need to, you know, if I put in a claim for an accident, and then I change to another insurance firm and I put in another claim for a similar windscreen or whatever, AI will pick up that it's the same windscreen, but a human would say, okay, this chap is claiming another claim. So there are massive advantages. If we look at the manufacturing process, okay, so manufacturing lends itself to robotics in a brilliant way. I know that Alexei was involved in a brilliant project regarding twinning. Okay, so you have the same, so you have a manufacturing process, you have a twin, which is a digital twin, and it's mapped out all the processes, all the maintenance. So you are predicting what needs to be done before it happens, okay? And how is that helping the business? How is that helping the individual? Because they've got no crisis by management. They've got continuous ongoing support by the intelligence, which is being poured in. And the beauty about this is that if we combine it with other technologies, such as IoT, Okay, then we can be talking, you know, for example, smart cities. Okay, so Internet of Things together with our artificial intelligence might have picked up that we were going to have a flood, we were going to have rains coming in, and therefore the IoT sensors which are in the gutters and whatever would have said, okay, currently the gutter in wherever is currently, you know, currently semi-blocked or is in this situation. Why should I have to find out after the event? Okay, and this is all information which is available and technology is available and which is not expensive to implement when you understand what the claims are against it, because obviously everything is expensive, but how much more expensive it is if it's for that inconvenience to the industry who cannot pass, to the insurance claims that come across it. So we should really take advantage. And the beauty about business and enterprise is that it is self-initiating. It's not waiting for something one area or the other. Having said that, there are a lot of schemes which are in place, but I'll stop at this point because I'm not sure where you want to go with the conversation.
So maybe we can discuss a bit about challenges to Malta
Okay.
to embrace digitization. What do you think will be the main challenges for us, being a small island state and all?
Okay. Well, in this case, small is beautiful because obviously we are working, we are able to take these challenges, and as we promoted Malta in the past as test beds. Having said that, we need to have structured data available. So when we talk to our clients, the first thing we do is understand where the client wants to go, what data is available, and in what format. Yes, and usually it's all a case about building a structured data lake whereby, and then we can access it, bringing out the information the management want to see. Now, in reality, Malta has a lot of SMEs of a certain size. So we have to look at the quick wins for these companies. We can't go for always thinking about banks, about hospitals, about health. We're looking at how do we implement in our day-to-day smaller organizations. So on the manufacturing side, you know, it's very simple. We sit down with the client, we understand the processes, we see what data is available, and then we say, what data do you need to take the decisions in a quick form, and obviously reduce the mundane work which has to be done within manufacturing. Because that's the beauty, as I mentioned about AI, we are going to improve the way the person works so that they will do the more interesting jobs, okay? In relation to, so we mentioned health, we mentioned smart cities, manufacturing, customer support, a very obvious one, the chatbot. So most software applications which are out there nowadays are, the new ones at least, are having a chatbot attached to them. Why should I need to phone in to ask particular questions? Why should I be, you know, so the chatbot is that artificial intelligence based on a lot of information and information which has been put in the system and asked in previous times and made available 24/7. Okay, just to mention that, where would the chat, I mean, when I travel and I need to ask something in particular, wouldn't it be nice if it's, you know, 11 p.m. I'm asking the questions and I'm getting, so the systems are there. It's just a case that the right companies have to implement it. And I would like to think that on the island, there are a number of professionals and companies which are helping these organizations to put it into it. And from a challenges point of view, whilst, you know, businesses all over the world have gone through a difficult time because of the pandemic and are looking to reinvent themselves, there's no better time than to do it. Because we cannot, you know, the companies are looking how to reinvent themselves under these current scenarios. Now, to my knowledge, there are a number of schemes which are offered by the various local government parastatal organizations, which are offering such schemes. It's up to the individual, up to the company who has to identify with a particular project. And I believe this type of webinar is very relevant in putting out the message so that such companies can take an initiative and be helped. But at the end of the day, the willingness has to come from their end. So if they are, you know, you can't sit on it, you have to move forward.
And Professor Alexei Dingley, with your experience with businesses, what is your idea about our preparedness, Malta, to embrace AI?
Okay, so the simple answer is we are not prepared. The reason is various. First of all, as you probably know, I was part of the multinational AI strategy, and one of the things which was clear was the lack of knowledge on AI. First of all, because AI is pervasive, as I said earlier, that people do not realize that they use AI. In fact, in one of the surveys which we did with EY, it came out that, you know, when we asked people, how many of you use AI, businesses, how many of you use AI, I think it was about 30–40% said they used it. When we gave them examples of what is AI, this number shot up to 80%. And I get the same feedback from people. So when I give a talk, one of the things I like to say, I ask, so who uses AI over here? And practically almost no one puts up his hand. When I explain then what is AI, then most of them put up their hands. So, you know, there's this lack of knowledge. Also, as part of the national .ai strategy, I was chairing the consultations on work and employment. And when I was meeting one-to-one with all the various entities that are related to work and employment in Malta, it was very clear that most of them had no idea what is going to hit them. This, of course, is very concerning for me because, you know, there is nothing stopping the AI revolution. And if we are not prepared for it, then we will only keep on falling backwards. There isn't another way to it. So in my humble opinion, the biggest challenge which we will have to face is the educational challenge, whereby we need to teach people what is AI. Mind you, I'm not saying that everybody should become an AI scientist. That's not what I'm saying, but you know, they need to understand this technology and how it can benefit them to improve, of course, what they're doing in their daily lives and their businesses.
And what resources do you think will they need? What will they need to be equipped other than education? Like, do we need support, financial support?
To be honest, there are financial support. So if you have a look at, for example, the Job Plus have around, they had 14 million euros from EU funding for the retraining, upskilling, and reskilling of labor force. But you know, the truth is that there wasn't really such a big uptake for these. So that's why I'm saying education is important, because in my opinion, a lot of businesses are being myopic about what will happen in the future. They're more concerned about the now rather than the then. And I think, and this was also collaborated by the Chamber of Commerce, that, you know, the pandemic was an opportunity for re-engineering our sectors, because we were too dependent now on tourism and on the major ones. So we needed to diversify and look at new ways of doing things. But you know, we need to push it further, because even though, as I said, there are schemes, I can think of, for example, Malta Enterprise, they have the Business Enhanced scheme as well. But very few companies then make use of these schemes. So we need to push further, not into the you know, the current economies, but into a rehash of what we currently have, also keeping in mind what's coming in the next few years.
Yes. Yes, perfectly agreed. So there are the resources available. It's just up to the businesses to actually look them up and take up the interest and jump in the AI revolution now. What about with regards to the data protection regulation? Do you think there will be any issues in relation to data protection? Like, obviously the data will be available. The idea is that data will be available even across from businesses to government and vice versa. So will there not be a data protection breach in a way? What are your opinions on this?
So if you're asking me, I tend to say that thank God for the GDPR. You know, GDPR is not perfect, but it did help a lot. But I think what concerns me really is how GDPR came about, because let's not forget that GDPR was more of a reaction after the Cambridge Analytica incidents, where there was this massive data leak. So, you know, I think we should have a little bit more foresight, and rather than being reactive, we should try to be a little bit more proactive, because my biggest concern is that the coming years will bring much many more challenges to us. So just to give you an example, at the moment in AI, one of the largest language model is called GPT-3. GPT-3 is an AI system which generates text. Okay, now the fascinating thing about GPT-3 is that it generates text very similar to a human. So you can barely distinguish what it produces from what a human would produce. Now imagine, we all know that there are fake news farms producing huge amounts of fake news with people writing them. So imagine a person would take, I don't know, 5-10 minutes to write a fake news. With these new AI systems, you can churn out hundreds of fake news per minute. So this tsunami of misinformation, fake news, is coming towards us. And I think we need stricter regulations with regards to this sort of data. Of course, I think, as Marcel said, not to strive AI, because we have to be very careful that regulation then doesn't kill AI, because that's not what we want, but to protect the European citizens from these threats.
Yes. And what about, for example, the victims or damage caused by AI? We mentioned at one point, like having buses or motor vehicles being driven by AI. If the layperson might be hit by a car driven by an artificial intelligence, what compensation is there even a compensation for that? For the time being, probably not, obviously not, because we don't have.
I think with regards to this, first of all, having compensation should become much easier, simply because these kind of incidents will unfortunately increase in the future. It's inevitable. No, when we adopt more of these technologies, we will have more clashes with the technology, unfortunately. So it will happen. So we need to find ways of making things easier as well. But on the other hand, I appreciate that it's a very complex thing. For a very simple reason, it's very hard to understand who is to blame. Okay, so if we take the famous case of self-driving cars, if a self-driving car hits someone, kills someone, all right, who's to blame? Is it maybe the owner of the car, but the owner is not driving the car? Is it the manufacturer of the car, but probably the manufacturer didn't even develop the software? Is it the software developer then of the car? But the software learns. If you look at self-driving cars today, the self-driving cars have a collective memory of around 60 years of continuous driving. So it's very hard to determine who is to be responsible. So we should find new maybe solutions. Maybe, I don't know, maybe the apportionment of the blame. Maybe different people have different percentage of blames. It could be as well maybe the self-driving cars themselves. I mean, recently we had this debate in Malta as well a few years back about giving identity, a legal identity to an AI. Okay, so could it be that when people buy these kind of cars, maybe a small amount goes into a common kitty to serve for this purpose, and when an AI has an accident, maybe the victim will get compensation from that kitty? I don't know, but these are very complex issues, and it's not easy to determine the blame in this case. But we need to find out workable solutions, because when they get deployed and they become reality, we will have to face these problems.
Marcel, do you have some practical examples in which Maltese businesses can integrate digitization into their business models?
Okay. So first of all, when we say digitization, we're talking about taking what they're currently doing and improving on what they're doing using technology. Okay, so for every aspect, technology can really assist and all. So it depends on the industry. The most obvious ones we just went through with the pandemic is the restaurateurs were hit badly, and obviously they evolved and they made themselves digitally available with all the relevant technology that there is out there, okay, which we are only too aware of. Whether if it's the cab companies, okay, the various taxis and all these applications have taken them to town. Now it's so convenient that where previously one would think twice about taking a cab. You know, it's pop, 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 you know, and you know where the chap is, how quickly he'll be there, and what price he's going to charge you to the location you're going. The convenience is unbelievable. Now, these are the obvious ones which we all use day to day. Okay, but if we take it into the business aspect, where I mentioned earlier, for example, the RPA, the robotic process automation, where you take out the mundane jobs, that is very doable. If you take, for example, compliance is so big, but it's a big overhead on all organizations which have to maintain. Okay, so there are solutions out there which are vetting your clients on a 24/7 basis and identifying those clients which step out of your risk matrix, rather than vetting everyone, because that is the process. Every quarter I have to vet 1/4 of my clients. That's how people used to do it in the past. Now, on a daily basis, based with all this information which is available, the systems are going out there, seeing what information is there, mapping it to your client, seeing if it's a hit, because and then there are percentages, because people have same names, different, you know, there's all that information out there. And it says, okay, when you wake up in the morning, you get a dashboard and it tells you these 5 clients need to be checked. Why? Because there might be an article which mentions, but it might be not relevant to your relationship. There might be that he has partnered up with another individual who sits in a country which to you deem as high risk, and therefore he has become high risk, and therefore you have to evaluate again. So compliance is massive, and that's where digitization has really come into play. Banks, we think of banks in the archaic fashion, but the reality, banks have had to change their way of thinking, because all these smaller digital-only banks, digital-first banks, are taking over the market. And as our population, well, those people who are used to going to the bank and used to internet banking, and now are always doing everything on their mobile, time is passing and people are much happier to work with those type of banks. Yes? Okay, always keeping in mind that you need to have the regulatory background and all that. Okay, so as far as digitization, there is no area which cannot be improved. Okay, and obviously then there are the disruptors. So when we're talking about disruptive technology, there are areas which are going to take us to a different, it's a paradigm shift. We used to do things one way, whatever. So if we talk of blockchain technology, that is a disruptor. Okay, if we talk about, for example, the way solutions are developed, at this point, one goes to a software house. Can't it be that there are ways of doing it, that the subject matter expert sits down with a platform which is in the low-code environment and actually develops a solution for himself, which has all the regulatory, which has all the compliance, which has all the security, and be able to produce something? Because we are only too aware that for digitization, we are looking at software, and software, the shortage of the resources that the world is experiencing this year is phenomenal. Europe, you know, 500,000 needs more, 500,000 more developers. From where is it going to get them? You know, it's just not going to happen. So what we have to do and what we have to disrupt is the way it's done. And this is what certain companies are looking to do, to disrupt in a positive sense, because the demand is phenomenal, but the supply is very tight.
Thank you very much, all of you, for attending today. Your contributions have been very valuable. If you would like to add anything else, please feel free before we conclude. I think we're all good. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.